dare he ask to spare his life when Angie begged for hers? How dare he? How dare he?
An 18-year-old woman gets brutally murdered in her Idaho Falls apartment, and detectives arrest a suspect who confesses to the crime. The only problem? His DNA doesn't match the crime scene. For 23 years, the real killer walks free while an innocent man sits in prison. Then, a discarded cigarette butt changes everything. This is the twisted case of Angie Dodge, a story that exposes how a coerced confession, tunnel vision, and investigative failures allowed a murderer to live across the street from his victim while someone else paid the price. What makes this case even more remarkable is the victim's own mother, who spent decades fighting to free the man convicted of killing her daughter, knowing in her heart he was innocent. Angie Raye Dodge enters the world on December 21, 1977, in Vancouver, Washington. Her parents, Jack and Carol Dodge, welcome their youngest child and only daughter into a family that already includes 3 older brothers. From her earliest years, Angie demonstrates exceptional intelligence and an infectious enthusiasm for life that draws people to her naturally. The Dodge family relocates to Idaho Falls, Idaho, where Angie completes her education. Throughout her school years, she stands out not just for her academic abilities, but for her generous spirit. She spends countless hours tutoring younger children in math and English, sharing her knowledge freely with anyone who needs help. Friends describe her as someone who greets everyone with a hug, refuses to tolerate nonsense from anyone, and possesses one of the sharpest minds in their social circle. Angie graduates from Idaho Falls High School with honors in 1995 and briefly attends Idaho State University. She loves camping, cherishes holidays with her family, and dreams of becoming an entrepreneur in the business world. Her vibrant personality and vivacious smile make her unforgettable to everyone who crosses her path. By May 1996, Angie reaches a turning point in her young adult life. After a disagreement with her parents over household rules, she decides to move into her own apartment, a small second-floor unit in North Idaho Falls. The move represents independence and a fresh start. Carol Dodge helps her daughter settle into the new place just 3 weeks before everything changes. On their last evening together, mother and daughter reconcile over their earlier disagreement. They embrace, rocking back and forth as if dancing, and Carol whispers that Angie will always be her baby. Angie responds in her trademark way, "I still whittle, huh, Mommy?" her childhood pronunciation of little that always makes them both smile. That conversation takes place on June 12, 1996. Within hours, Angie Dodge's life ends in the most horrific way imaginable. The evening of June 12, 1996 unfolds like countless other nights for Angie Dodge. She spends time with friends from her social circle, a loose group of young people known locally as the River Rats, who hang out along the Snake River trails near her apartment. The gathering feels typical, filled with conversation and laughter. Angie heads home to her apartment sometime after dark, looking forward to her work shift the next morning. She settles into bed in her small bedroom, unaware that someone watches her building, unaware that a predator lives just across the street, observing her comings and goings, unaware that this will be her last night alive. The early morning hours of June 13, 1996, bring unspeakable violence to Angie's quiet apartment. Someone breaks in while she sleeps. What happens next leaves investigators shaken. Even veterans with 15 years of experience describe the scene as the most horrific they've ever encountered. Angie works at Beauty for All Seasons, a store in downtown Idaho Falls. When she fails to show up for her scheduled shift on the morning of June 13th, her co-workers Julia and Tawny grow concerned. Angie prides herself on reliability. Missing work without calling doesn't fit her character at all. By mid-morning, worry pushes them to take action. Julia and Tawny drive to Angie's apartment complex in North Idaho Falls. They climb the stairs to her second-floor unit and knock on the door. No answer. They knock again, calling her name. Still nothing. Then one of them tries the doorknob. It turns. The door opens. The unlocked door immediately feels wrong. Everything feels wrong. They push the door open wider and step inside, calling Angie's name. The apartment appears relatively normal at first glance. Then they move toward the bedroom. What they discover destroys them. Angie lies on the bedroom floor, her head against the wall, partially naked, surrounded by blood. So much blood. A stuffed teddy bear near her bed sits soaked in crimson. The young women immediately back out of the apartment, their screams piercing the quiet morning. One of them dials 911, her voice shaking as she reports what they've found. Idaho Falls Police Department officers arrive at the scene within minutes. Detective Jeff Pratt responds to the call, stepping into what he later describes as a nightmare. The brutality shocks even seasoned investigators. Angie has been sexually assaulted and stabbed repeatedly. Her throat bears such deep cuts that she nearly suffered decapitation. The amount of blood indicates she bled out where she fell. Before we continue with what happened next, hit that subscribe button if you want to see justice served in cases like this. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Crime scene technicians begin their meticulous work, photographing every inch of the apartment and collecting evidence. They find a bloody handprint on Angie's body. They collect hair samples from the scene. Most importantly, they recover semen from the victim, clear evidence of sexual assault that will provide crucial DNA evidence. The killer left his genetic signature behind, a calling card that investigators believe will quickly lead them to justice. The apartment shows signs of forced entry. Someone broke in specifically to attack Angie. This wasn't a random burglary gone wrong or a crime of opportunity. Someone targeted this young woman in her own home, in the place where she should have felt safest. Detectives immediately canvass the apartment complex and surrounding neighborhood. They interview everyone who might have seen or heard something unusual during the night. They knock on doors, asking residents if they noticed any strange vehicles, unfamiliar people, or suspicious activity. Among those interviewed is a man named Brian Lee Dripps Sr., who lives directly across the street from Angie's apartment. He tells officers he saw and heard nothing unusual. They note his information and move on. The investigation grows more urgent by the hour. Detectives collect DNA samples from people who knew Angie, particularly males in her social circle. The River Rats group becomes a focus of attention. Investigators learn that Angie attended a gathering with this group the night before her death. Could her killer have been among them? Family members receive the devastating news. Carol Dodge's world shatters when police inform her that Angie is dead. The mother who said, "I love you" to her daughter just hours earlier now faces an unimaginable reality. Jack Dodge and his 3 sons join Carol in grief that no parent or sibling should ever experience. Their youngest child, their only daughter, their vibrant Angie who wanted to change the world, gone at 18 years old. The medical examiner's findings confirm what the crime scene suggested. Angie dies from blood loss caused by multiple stab wounds, particularly the devastating injuries to her throat. The sexual assault occurred either immediately before or during the attack. Evidence indicates she fought back against her attacker, showing the courage and strength that defined her character even in her final moments. Based on when friends last saw her alive and when her body was discovered, investigators place the time of death in the early morning hours of June 13th, sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Forensic experts process the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. The profile they develop shows a single unknown male perpetrator. This individual raped and murdered Angie Dodge, leaving his genetic material behind. Investigators feel confident that once they identify a suspect, the DNA will provide irrefutable proof of guilt. Tips flood the Idaho Falls Police Department. Hundreds of calls come in during the first weeks following Angie's death. Some callers suggest the crime involved multiple perpetrators based on the violence and chaos of the scene. Others point investigators towards specific individuals in Angie's social circle. Some tips mention drug connections, rumors that Angie knew something about methamphetamine dealing and paid the price for that knowledge. Detectives pursue every lead methodically. They interview dozens of people. They collect DNA samples from potential suspects and submit them for testing. They analyze phone records, review alibis, and construct timelines. The community remains on edge, knowing a brutal killer walks among them. Summer turns to fall. Fall becomes winter. The calendar flips to 1997. 6 months pass without an arrest. The DNA profile sits in the system, waiting for a match that doesn't come. None of the samples collected from potential suspects match the crime scene evidence. Investigators work tirelessly, but the case grows colder with each passing day. Then, in January 1997, a development in Nevada sets events in motion that will shape the next 2 decades of this case, but not in the way anyone expects. What happens next represents one of the most controversial wrongful conviction cases in American criminal justice history. On January 5, 1997, police in Ely, Nevada, arrest a man named Benjamin Hobbs on sexual assault charges. When Idaho Falls detectives learn about the arrest, they see a potential connection to the Angie Dodge case. Hobbs comes from Idaho Falls. He knew Angie. He ran in the same social circles. Investigators travel to Nevada to interview him about the murder. Hobbs denies any involvement in Angie's death. The interview doesn't produce a confession, but it gives detectives a new strategy. They decide to interview Hobbs's friends back in Idaho Falls, hoping someone might provide information linking him to the crime. This approach leads them to a 20-year-old man named Christopher Tapp. Chris Tapp exists on the periphery of the River Rats social group. He knows both Angie Dodge and Ben Hobbs, though not intimately. He attended the gathering along the Snake River the night before Angie's death, where he saw her among the crowd. Detectives bring Tapp in for questioning on January 7, 1997, initially viewing him as a potential witness who might provide information about Hobbs. During that first interview, Tapp tells detectives he knows nothing about Angie's murder. He says neither he nor Hobbs had any involvement. The conversation ends and Tapp goes home, but investigators aren't finished with him. They schedule a follow-up interview for January 10th. When Tapp arrives for the second interview, the tone shifts dramatically. Detectives push harder, suggesting they know he's hiding something. They tell him Ben Hobbs killed Angie Dodge. They say Hobbs asked Tapp to provide an alibi. The pressure intensifies throughout the interview. When it ends, Tapp's story has changed. Now he claims Hobbs confessed to killing Angie and asked for help covering it up. He says Hobbs was angry at Angie for supposedly trying to break up his marriage. Detectives schedule yet another interview for January 11th. Before that meeting takes place, Tapp's parents hire an attorney. They sense something dangerous happening. Their son contacts the lawyer, who advises him not to attend the scheduled interview. Tapp follows this advice and stays home. Idaho Falls police don't wait. Officers arrive at the Tapp family home with an arrest warrant. They charge Christopher Tapp with being an accessory to a felony. His parents watch helplessly as their son is taken into custody. The attorney Mrs. Tapp hired informs detectives that Tapp will come to the station on January 13th to answer questions with legal representation present. Police ignore this and proceed with the arrest anyway. Now in custody, Tapp faces interrogation without his attorney present. Over the following days and weeks, he endures more than 100 hours of questioning. The interrogation tapes, later reviewed by experts, reveal techniques that cross ethical and legal boundaries. Detectives use deception, make promises, issue threats, and feed Tapp information about the crime. They tell him he faces the death penalty unless he cooperates. They suggest that if he provides information, prosecutors will offer immunity. Under this relentless pressure, Tapp's story evolves repeatedly. On January 15th, his account changes again. Now he claims he was present when Hobbs killed Angie. He says he witnessed the murder, but didn't participate. Detectives push for more details. They're not satisfied with this version either. The story shifts once more. Tapp now accuses another person, Jeremy Sargis, of participating alongside Hobbs. According to this new narrative, Hobbs and Sargis raped and killed Angie while Tapp watched. Detectives immediately pursue this lead. They bring Sargis in for questioning and collect his DNA. On January 27th, the lab results for Jeremy Sargis come back. Negative. His DNA doesn't match the crime scene evidence. Furthermore, Sargis's alibi checks out completely. He wasn't anywhere near Angie's apartment that night. Prosecutors grow angry. They void Tapp's immunity agreement on January 29th, claiming he provided false information. That same day, January 29th, detectives take Tapp to Angie Dodge's apartment. His attorney declines to accompany him. At the actual crime scene, surrounded by investigators, Tapp produces yet another version of events. This time, he claims he held Angie down during the rape and stabbing. Ben Hobbs remains in the story, but Jeremy Sargis disappears, replaced by an unknown friend of Hobbs named Mike, someone Tapp supposedly never met and can't identify. Throughout this process, Tapp takes multiple polygraph examinations. On January 30th, during his 5th polygraph test, detectives suggest a new angle. They tell him he might receive a more lenient sentence if he acted under duress, if he participated because he feared for his own life after witnessing Angie's attack. This framing provides Tapp with a psychological escape route, a way to admit involvement while preserving some sense that he's not a monster. The interrogations continue. By the time they end, Tapp has confessed on videotape to participating in Angie Dodge's rape and murder. His confession contains numerous inconsistencies and contradictions. Details change from telling to telling. He provides information that proves factually incorrect, but prosecutors now have a confession and they move forward with charges. One crucial fact never changes throughout this entire process. Christopher Tapp's DNA does not match the genetic material left at the crime scene. The semen collected from Angie's body belongs to someone else entirely. This evidence excludes Tapp as the person who sexually assaulted and murdered Angie Dodge. Prosecutors develop a theory to explain this inconvenient fact. They argue that multiple people participated in the attack, and Tapp was one of them even if his DNA wasn't recovered. They point to the crime scene's chaos, Angie's multiple wounds, and witness statements about the River Rats group as supporting this theory. The fact that no other participant has been identified doesn't stop them from moving forward. Christopher Tapp faces trial in May 1998, more than 2 years after Angie's death. Despite his attorney's arguments that the confession was coerced and unreliable, despite the complete lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime, despite the DNA evidence that clearly excludes him, the prosecution presents its case to a jury. The jury hears the videotaped confession. They see a young man admitting to participating in a brutal murder. The inconsistencies and contradictions get explained away. The coercive interrogation techniques get minimized. The absence of physical evidence gets overshadowed by the power of a confession. After approximately 13 hours of deliberation, the jury reaches its verdict. Guilty. Christopher Tapp is convicted of aiding and abetting first-degree murder and rape. Carol Dodge sits in the courtroom, staring at the man she believes murdered her daughter. "You beast," she thinks. "You horrible beast." Her anger surges as she looks into the eyes of someone she views as evil personified. The judge sentences Tapp to a minimum of 30 years in prison, with the possibility of life. At 20 years old, he enters the Idaho prison system for a crime he maintains he didn't commit. His family watches in anguish. His attorney promises to appeal. But Christopher Tapp becomes inmate number assigned to him, beginning a sentence that will span more than 2 decades. Meanwhile, the real killer, the man whose DNA actually matches the crime scene evidence, remains free. His identity stays unknown. He continues his life without consequence, walking the streets of Idaho Falls, perhaps even following news coverage of Tapp's conviction. The case officially remains open because investigators still seek the person whose genetic material was found on Angie's body. But with Tapp behind bars and no other suspects identified, the active investigation slows significantly. Tips decrease, media attention fades. The community gradually moves forward, believing justice has been served. Only it hasn't, not even close. And that's where this case enters a long, painful period that will test everyone involved, especially one mother who refuses to accept what seems like a closed case. Christopher Tapp sits in an Idaho prison cell, maintaining his innocence despite the conviction. In July 2001, the Idaho Supreme Court affirms his conviction, denying his appeal. Between 2002 and 2015, Tapp files several post-conviction relief petitions. The courts dismiss all but one of them. The legal system appears to have spoken its final word on the matter, but something extraordinary begins happening. Carol Dodge, the victim's mother, who initially viewed Tapp as her daughter's killer, starts questioning everything about the case. Carol cannot ignore the DNA evidence. She understands the science. The genetic material recovered from her daughter's body doesn't match Christopher Tapp, not even close. If Tapp participated in the rape and murder, as prosecutors claimed, why isn't his DNA present at all? The multiple perpetrator theory never sat right with her, and as time passes, it makes less and less sense. She obtains copies of the interrogation videotapes. Watching them proves devastating for different reasons than she expected. Instead of seeing a guilty man trying to hide the truth, Carol sees a young person being manipulated, led, and coerced into saying what detectives want to hear. She watches them feed him information about the crime. She sees them make promises and issue threats. She recognizes techniques designed to break someone down psychologically. By 2007, Carol Dodge makes a decision that shocks everyone who knows the case. She begins working to help free the man convicted of killing her daughter. She doesn't do this because she forgives him or because she's gone soft. She does it because she believes the justice system got it wrong. She knows with increasing certainty that Christopher Tapp didn't murder Angie, which means the real killer remains free, a thought that haunts her every single day. The Idaho Innocence Project takes an interest in Tapp's case around this same time. A professor and undergraduate students at Boise State University who work with the project review the interrogation tapes. They reach the same conclusion Carol did. The confession appears heavily coerced. They begin advocating for post-conviction DNA testing on additional evidence from the crime scene. In 2009, forensic experts conduct new DNA testing on items collected from Angie's apartment: her shirt, sweatpants, and the blood-soaked teddy bear found near her bed. The results exclude both Christopher Tapp and Benjamin Hobbs as contributors to any biological material present. This evidence strengthens the argument that Tapp had no involvement whatsoever. Tapp's legal team requests broader retesting on other pieces of evidence. In 2012, a judge denies this request, citing limited potential to undermine the confessions despite the DNA exclusions. The ruling frustrates everyone working on Tapp's behalf. How much evidence do they need to prove he's innocent? Years continue passing. 2010 becomes 2011. 2011 becomes 2012. Then 2013. The calendar pages turn while Christopher Tapp remains imprisoned and Angie Dodge's real killer remains unknown. DNA technology advances significantly during these years. New techniques emerge that can extract genetic material from surfaces and samples that previously yielded nothing useful. Around 2015, investigators decide to try some of these new methods on the old evidence. They use a wet vacuum system called MVAC to extract trace DNA from Angie's clothing and a blanket from the crime scene. This technique proves more effective than previous methods. The testing yields stronger genetic profiles from samples that produced nothing before. Every single test consistently excludes Christopher Tapp, while confirming the presence of an unidentified male whose DNA was left during the sexual assault. The evidence becomes overwhelming. Yet Tapp remains behind bars. The legal system moves slowly when correcting its mistakes. Carol Dodge refuses to give up. She contacts journalists, advocacy groups, and anyone who will listen. She becomes an expert on DNA evidence, interrogation techniques, and wrongful convictions. Her mission consumes her life. In 2014, the case takes an unexpected and troubling turn. Detectives, desperate for any break after 18 years, search a DNA database owned by Ancestry.com, which was public at that time. They find what appears to be a familial match. The genetic markers suggest a connection to a man named Michael Usry Sr., who shared 34 out of 35 DNA markers with Angie's killer. People like those who manipulate justice count on silence to cover their evil. Show them your voice stands for justice. Type "Justice for Angie Dodge" in the comments and hit that like button. Investigators focus on Michael Usry Jr., the son. They learn he's a filmmaker living in New Orleans who once created a short film called Murderabilia, a project focused on true crime. This detail makes him seem like a viable suspect in their minds. Detectives travel to Louisiana and show up at Usry's door, asking him to come to headquarters for questioning. Michael Usry Jr. experiences every innocent person's nightmare. Police suspect him of murdering someone he's never heard of in a state he barely remembers visiting. He travels through Idaho Falls years ago, which police cite as suspicious. They collect a DNA sample and tell him to wait while they process it. For more than a month, Usry lives with the uncertainty, knowing he's innocent, but unable to prove it immediately. On January 13, 2015, Usry receives an email that changes everything. Michael Usry Jr., we just wanted to let you know that your DNA did not match our crime scene DNA, something you already knew. He's officially cleared. The relief feels immense, but the trauma lingers. The experience leaves him angry at everyone involved: police, scientists, database companies. How could they misfire so badly? This incident raises serious questions about familial DNA searching and privacy concerns. Using genetic genealogy databases to identify suspects introduces ethical dilemmas that the justice system hasn't fully addressed. But for Carol Dodge, it represents something else: proof that investigators remain willing to try new approaches to find Angie's killer. After the Usry incident, the case goes quiet again for several years. Then, in March 2017, a significant development occurs. Christopher Tapp's rape conviction gets vacated by the court, though the murder conviction stands. Prosecutors release him from prison after he serves 20 years. He walks free, but remains technically convicted of murder, a bizarre legal limbo. Tapp's release energizes Carol Dodge. She's helped free an innocent man, but her work isn't finished. Her daughter's killer still walks free. She knows that somewhere out there, a man lives his life knowing he got away with murder. That knowledge drives her forward with renewed determination. A new police chief takes over the Idaho Falls Police Department. Bryce Johnson looks at the Angie Dodge case with fresh eyes. He talks to all the detectives and delivers a clear message. Let's not worry about what's been done over the past 23 years. We have one mission. It's to find out who left this DNA sample. In May 2017, the department announces a new Angie Dodge tip line and releases computer-generated sketches of the man who left DNA at the crime scene. The sketches use snapshot DNA phenotyping, technology that predicts physical traits like ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin color, freckling, and face shape based on genetic markers. The composites show what the suspect might have looked like at 25 years old, with an average body mass index. Carol Dodge sees these images and feels her daughter speaking to her. "You're almost there, Mom." She almost gave up multiple times during the long years of frustration, but something always pushed her forward. Now, with new technology and a police chief committed to solving the case, hope returns. By late 2018, Idaho Falls investigators decide to take another approach with genetic genealogy, this time more carefully and ethically than the Usry incident. They reach out to Cece Moore, a genetic genealogy expert with Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia. Moore has gained recognition for using genetic genealogy to solve cold cases across the country. Carol Dodge contacts Moore directly, sending her the crime scene photos. Moore later admits the images make her just ill and very, very, very angry seeing what had been done to Angie. The case becomes personal for her. She agrees to help find the killer. Moore begins the painstaking process of building family trees using the DNA profile from Angie's crime scene. She searches GED Match, a public repository for autosomal DNA where people voluntarily upload their genetic information. Unlike the ancestry database that ensnared Michael Usry, GEDmatch users opt in with the understanding their information might help solve crimes. The work takes months. Moore analyzes genetic markers, constructs family trees, and identifies potential relatives of the unknown suspect. It's tedious, exhausting work that requires expertise in both genetics and genealogy. But Carol Dodge's persistence inspires her. If a mother can spend 23 years fighting for justice, Moore can spend months working on the genetics. As 2018 turns into 2019, Moore makes progress that will finally, after more than 2 decades, lead investigators to the truth about who raped and murdered Angie Dodge on that June morning in 1996. But the breakthrough would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. A man who was there all along, hiding in plain sight. C.C. Moore works methodically through the genetic data, building and analyzing family trees for months. The DNA profile from Angie's crime scene points to specific family lineages. She narrows the possibilities, eliminating branches of family trees one by one. Her work reveals something remarkable. The killer has to be a grandson or great-grandson of a couple named Clarence and Cleo A. Landrum Ussery. Moore identifies 6 known male descendants of this couple as possible suspects. All 6 become persons of interest. Investigators begin the careful process of determining which of these men could have been in Idaho Falls in June 1996, when Angie Dodge was murdered. One of the 6 stands out immediately. Records show he lived in Idaho during the relevant time frame. Detectives feel confident they found their man. They begin surveillance, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample without alerting him to their investigation. When the opportunity comes, they collect the sample and submit it for testing. The results come back negative. No match. The disappointment hits everyone hard. They were so certain. The genetic genealogy pointed directly to this family tree, and this man fit all the criteria. How could it not be him? C.C. Moore refuses to accept defeat. She returns to her research, diving deeper into the Ussery family genealogy. She spends 3 more months meticulously tracing bloodlines, following paper trails, and constructing more detailed family trees. Her persistence pays off when she discovers something investigators missed: a 7th male descendant who didn't appear in the initial family tree research. This man exists outside the traditional genealogical records. His connection to the Ussery family line took extensive work to uncover. His name, Brian Lee. Dripps senior detectives immediately begin researching Brian Dripps. What they discover makes their hearts race. In 1996, Brian Dripps lived in Idaho Falls. Not just in Idaho Falls, he lived directly across the street from Angie Dodge's apartment complex. He could literally see her building from his window. More shocking. When detectives review the initial canvassing reports from June 1996, they find Brian Dripps' name. An officer interviewed him 5 days after Angie's murder as part of the neighborhood canvass. He claimed he saw and heard nothing unusual that night. The officer noted his information and moved on to other neighbors. For 23 years, the real killer's name sat in the case file, overlooked and forgotten. By 2019, Dripps lives in Caldwell, Idaho, not far from Idaho Falls. He's 53 years old, living a seemingly normal life. He works in construction, has 3 children from a failed marriage, and presents himself as a devoted father figure and solid friend to those who know him. Nobody suspects he carries a horrific secret from 1996. Investigators begin surveillance operations. They need a DNA sample to confirm what genetic genealogy suggests, that Brian Dripps is Angie Dodge's killer. They follow him carefully, waiting for him to discard something that contains his genetic material. The opportunity comes when Drips throws a cigarette butt out of his car window. Officers collect the discarded cigarette and rush it to the lab. The testing process feels agonizingly slow to everyone involved. Carol Dodge knows investigators have a suspect, but doesn't know the details yet. Christopher Tapp, now living as a free man, waits anxiously for news. The entire community that lived through this tragedy holds its collective breath. Before we get to the arrest that shocked everyone, share this video with someone who follows true crime. Stories like Angie's need to be heard. Also, drop a comment. What's the weather like where you are? The DNA results arrive. Complete match. The genetic material on the cigarette butt matches perfectly with the semen collected from Angie Dodge's body 23 years earlier. After more than 2 decades, investigators finally know with absolute certainty who raped and murdered Angie Dodge. On May 15, 2019, law enforcement prepares to arrest Brian Lee. Drips Senior Police Chief Bryce Johnson coordinates the operation personally. Officers move into position around Drips's location in Caldwell. The arrest happens without incident. Drips appears confused and shocked when officers identify themselves and inform him he's under arrest for the 1996 rape and murder of Angie Dodge. Detectives transport Drips from Canyon County to Idaho Falls, where he's booked into the Bonneville County Jail. They schedule an interrogation, knowing they have the DNA evidence, but wanting to see if he'll confess. Before the formal interrogation begins, Drips asks for something to eat. Officers bring him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He eats it slowly, appearing to gather his thoughts. The interrogation begins. At first, Drips denies everything. He claims he doesn't know anything about Angie Dodge or her murder. Detectives let him talk, watching his body language, noting his responses. Then they begin presenting the evidence methodically. They tell him about the DNA match. They explain genetic genealogy and how it led them to his family tree. They describe the cigarette butt and the perfect match between his genetic material and the semen from the crime scene. They inform him they know he lived across the street from Angie's apartment in 1996. They remind him that he was interviewed 5 days after the murder. The weight of the evidence becomes undeniable. Drips understands there's no escape from the science. His demeanor changes. After hours of interrogation, Brian Lee Drips Sr. confesses to raping and murdering Angie Dodge. His confession reveals details that make the crime even more disturbing. Drips admits he was heavily intoxicated on alcohol and high on cocaine that night. His wife had recently left him, and he'd been drinking and using drugs heavily in the aftermath of their separation. He watched Angie's apartment from across the street. He knew when she was home alone. In the early morning hours of June 13, 1996, Drips crossed the street and broke into Angie's apartment while she slept. He carried a pocket knife with him. He claims he went there intending to rape her, not kill her. According to his confession, the murder wasn't premeditated. It just happened during the assault. Angie fought back. She resisted. She threatened to report him. Drips claims he panicked. He used his knife, slashing her throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. She bled to death on her bedroom floor while he fled the scene, returning to his apartment across the street. Drips says he doesn't remember slitting her throat, but he doesn't deny it happened either. His confession contains this disturbing disconnect, admitting to the crime while claiming not to remember the worst parts of it. Whether this represents genuine memory gaps due to intoxication or a psychological defense mechanism remains unclear. Most chilling, Drips insists he acted alone. No accomplices, no conspiracy. Just him. This single fact confirms what Carol Dodge and the Idaho Innocence Project argued for years. Christopher Tapp had absolutely nothing to do with Angie's murder. The multiple perpetrator theory that justified Tapp's conviction was completely false. For 23 years, Brian Drips lived knowing he committed murder, while an innocent man served time for his crime. He never came forward. He never confessed. He watched news coverage of Tapp's trial and conviction without saying a word. He raised his children, worked his construction jobs, spent time with friends, and acted like a normal member of society while carrying this monstrous secret. On May 16, 2019, Police Chief Bryce Johnson holds a press conference. He announces that Idaho Falls police have arrested the man whose DNA matched the crime scene evidence from Angie Dodge's murder. He credits Carol Dodge for inspiring investigators to try harder and do better. Her determination, her refusal to accept a false solution, her years of advocacy, all of it led to this moment. Carol Dodge learns that her instincts were right all along. Christopher Tapp was innocent, and the real killer lived across the street from Angie's apartment, within sight of where her daughter took her last breath. With a confession on tape and irrefutable DNA evidence, prosecutors moved quickly to ensure Brian Dripps would face justice for what he did on that June morning in 1996. The interrogation room in Idaho Falls contains Brian Lee Dripps Sr., detectives who have waited 23 years for this moment, and the weight of a murder that destroyed countless lives. The DNA evidence gives investigators leverage that didn't exist with Christopher Tapp. This time, they have science on their side, irrefutable genetic proof linking the man sitting across from them to Angie Dodge's rape and murder. Detectives begin by establishing Dripps's background. He's 53 years old now, a father of 3, someone who served in the United States Marine Corps earlier in his life. He spent nearly 2 decades working in construction after leaving the military. On paper, he looks like an ordinary person who made something of himself despite coming from difficult circumstances. He was adopted as a child, served his country, held steady employment, and raised his children after his marriage failed. But detectives know what he did in 1996. They know the monster hiding beneath the ordinary facade. "Where were you on the morning of June 13, 1996? A detective asks. Dripps initially claims he doesn't remember. 23 years is a long time. How is anyone supposed to remember specific dates from that far back? He maintains this position for a while, playing innocent, suggesting confusion about why he's even being questioned about an old murder case. Detectives shift tactics. "Brian, we know you lived on North Yellowstone across from the apartment complex where Angie Dodge was murdered. Do you remember that?" His body language changes slightly. The question hits too close to home. "Yes," he admits. He lived there in 1996. He had an apartment in that area, but lots of people lived in that neighborhood. That doesn't mean anything. "Do you remember being interviewed by police 5 days after Angie's murder?" Another detective asks. Dripps pauses. This detail clearly surprises him. He didn't expect them to know about that brief interaction from over 2 decades ago. He acknowledges that maybe he talked to police during their neighborhood canvass. He might have told them he didn't see or hear anything unusual, but that was true. He didn't witness any crime. The detectives let him talk, allowing him to dig deeper into his denials. They note every inconsistency, every nervous gesture, every moment where his story doesn't quite hold together. Then they present the evidence that destroys any hope he has of maintaining his innocence. "Brian, we have DNA evidence from the crime scene, semen that was collected from Angie Dodge's body after she was raped and murdered." Dripps shifts in his seat. He knows where this is going. "We recently obtained your DNA from a cigarette butt you discarded. We tested it against the DNA from the crime scene. It's a perfect match. Your DNA was inside Angie Dodge after she was sexually assaulted. Can you explain that?" The room falls silent. Dripps stares at the table. His breathing changes. The reality sets in. There's no escaping the science. DNA evidence doesn't lie. The genetic material recovered from Angie's body 23 years ago belongs to him. Not someone similar, not a relative. Him, specifically. Detectives explain genetic genealogy and how it led them to his family tree. They describe months of investigation, family tree construction, and the process of narrowing down suspects until they identified him. They tell him about the surveillance, the cigarette butt, and the lab results confirming the match. "We know you did this, Brian. The evidence proves it beyond any doubt." What we need to understand is why. What happened that night? Drips remains silent for a long time. The weight of 23 years of lies begins crumbling. Finally, he starts talking. He describes his state of mind in June 1996. His wife had left him, taking their young children. He spiraled into heavy alcohol consumption and cocaine use. He lived across the street from Angie's apartment, watching people come and go. He noticed Angie, young, attractive, living alone in that second-floor unit. On the night of June 12th, going into the early morning hours of June 13th, Drips claims he consumed significant amounts of alcohol and cocaine. His judgment and inhibitions disappeared. He made a decision that would destroy multiple lives, including his own. "I went over there intending to rape her," he admits. "I had a pocket knife with me, but I didn't go there planning to murder anyone. I just wanted to..." He trails off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Detectives press him for details about entering the apartment and what happened inside. Drips provides information that matches what investigators know from the crime scene. He broke in while Angie slept. He attacked her in her bedroom. Angie fought back. She didn't surrender easily. She resisted, struggling against her attacker. She threatened to call police and report him. Drips claims this threat made him panic. In his drug and alcohol-impaired state, he felt trapped. He made the decision to ensure she couldn't identify him. "I used the knife," he says quietly. "It just happened. I didn't plan to kill her. It just happened in the moment." When detectives ask specifically about cutting her throat, Drips claims not to remember that detail. "I don't remember slitting her throat," he says, but then adds, "But I'm not denying it happened." This selective memory, admitting to the attack, but not remembering the most brutal part, suggests either genuine gaps from intoxication or a psychological inability to fully confront what he did. Detectives ask about accomplices. Did anyone help him? Was anyone else involved? This question carries enormous weight, given Christopher Tapp's wrongful conviction, based on the multiple perpetrator theory. "I acted alone," Drips states clearly. "Nobody else was involved. Just me." Those words confirm what advocates argued for years. The entire foundation of Chris Tapp's conviction was built on a false premise. No conspiracy existed. No group of attackers descended on Angie Dodge that night. Brian Drips committed the rape and murder by himself, leaving only his DNA behind because he was the only perpetrator. The interrogation concludes with Drips providing details that only the true killer would know. He describes aspects of the crime scene and Angie's apartment that never appeared in public reporting. These details give prosecutors additional confidence beyond the DNA evidence. Brian Lee Drips Sr. confessed to raping and murdering Angie Dodge. The confession, combined with the irrefutable DNA evidence, creates an airtight case. No room for doubt. No possibility of mistaken identity. The man sitting in the interrogation room destroyed an innocent young woman's life in the most violent way imaginable, then went home and slept in his bed across the street while her body lay undiscovered hours later. When asked if he ever thought about coming forward during the 23 years that followed, Drips claims he tried to put it out of his mind. He focused on raising his children, working his jobs, living his life. He watched Christopher Tapp get convicted and imprisoned without saying a word. He knew an innocent man paid the price for his crime, but self-preservation won over conscience every single time. With a confession on tape and DNA evidence that proved guilt beyond any possible doubt, prosecutors moved quickly to ensure Brian Drips would face justice for the horror he inflicted on Angie Dodge and her family. Following Brian Drips's arrest and confession in May 2019, prosecutors from the Idaho Attorney General's office take over the case. They charge him with first-degree murder and rape in connection with Angie Dodge's death. The charges carry the possibility of life in prison. Given the DNA evidence and recorded confession, prosecutors hold all the leverage in negotiations. But before legal proceedings against Drips can fully advance, another crucial matter demands attention: formally exonerating Christopher Tapp. On July 17, 2019, Christopher Tapp appears in Bonneville County Court, for a hearing that should have happened years earlier. With Brian Dripps in custody and DNA evidence proving Tapp's complete innocence, the court officially vacates his murder conviction. Prosecutors acknowledge what advocates argued for more than 2 decades. Christopher Tapp had absolutely no involvement in Angie Dodge's rape and murder. The confession that sent him to prison was false, coerced, through improper interrogation techniques that would haunt the Idaho Falls Police Department for years to come. Tapp walks out of the courthouse a fully exonerated man. 23 years after being falsely accused, 22 years after enduring brutal interrogations, 21 years after being wrongfully convicted, he finally receives the justice that should have been his from the beginning. Carol Dodge stands beside him, the victim's mother who fought tirelessly to free the man initially convicted of killing her daughter. Their alliance represents one of the most extraordinary aspects of this entire case. With Tapp's exoneration complete, focus returns to Brian Dripps. His case moves through the legal system during 2019 and 2020. Defense attorneys Elisa Massoth and Jim Archibald represent Dripps, facing an almost impossible task. The DNA evidence alone would be difficult to overcome. Combined with their client's confession, mounting a defense becomes nearly futile. They shift strategy toward negotiating the best possible outcome for Dripps given the circumstances. Plea negotiations occur through mediation sessions between the defense team and prosecutors. The death penalty isn't on the table. Idaho limits capital punishment to specific circumstances, and prosecutors don't pursue it in this case. But Dripps faces the certainty of life behind bars. The question becomes whether he'll have any possibility of parole, and when that possibility might occur. On February 9th, 2021, Brian Lee Dripps Sr. appears in Bonneville County Court for a change of plea hearing. Nearly 25 years after murdering Angie Dodge, he stands before a judge to admit his guilt formally and publicly. He pleads guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of rape as part of a negotiated plea agreement. During the hearing, prosecutors required Dripps to provide a detailed account of his crimes under oath. He admits to entering Angie Dodge's apartment on June 13, 1996. He acknowledges raping her at knife point. He confesses to stabbing her multiple times in the neck and torso after she resisted and threatened to report him. He admits she died from blood loss caused by his actions. He acknowledges being severely impaired by alcohol and cocaine, but maintains he didn't premeditate the murder, claiming he only intended non-consensual sex, but panicked during the struggle. The plea agreement avoids a full jury trial, sparing Angie's family from having to relive every horrific detail in open court. Prosecutors would have presented the DNA evidence from the cigarette butt, genetic genealogy testimony explaining how they identified Dripps, crime scene evidence, and the recorded confession. The outcome would have been certain conviction, but the emotional toll on everyone involved would have been immense. The court schedules sentencing for June 2021. However, complications arise. COVID-19 reaches the Bonneville County Jail, exposing inmates in Dripps's pod to the virus. Although Dripps tests negative and receives vaccination, Idaho Supreme Court orders mandate that those exposed to COVID should not enter courthouses. The sentencing hearing gets postponed. Finally, on June 8, 2021, Brian Lee Dripps Sr. appears before District Judge Joel Tingy for sentencing. The courtroom fills with people whose lives he destroyed: Angie's family members, Christopher Tapp's supporters, investigators who worked the case for decades, and community members who never forgot what happened to Angie Dodge. Prosecutors from the Attorney General's office present their arguments for maximum sentencing. Deputy Attorney General Jessica Quinn addresses the court with fury barely contained beneath her professional demeanor. She describes Angie's injuries again: her throat slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated, multiple stab wounds across her body, the terror she must have experienced in her final moments. Quinn focuses on what Dripps did after the murder. This case is not just about June 13, 1996, she tells Judge Tingy. It's about every day that followed after. She describes how Dripps lived 23 years knowing he murdered someone. He watched Christopher Tapp get arrested, interrogated, tried, and imprisoned. He knew an innocent man served time for his crime. He woke up every day and refused to take accountability for his actions. "Where was the remorse?" Quain demands. He lived every day of those 23 years like he had never taken a life. Angie's family members deliver victim impact statements that devastate everyone in the courtroom. Carol Dodge, now having fought for justice for 25 years, confronts her daughter's killer face to face. Tears stream down her face as she speaks. "My last words to her was, 'I love you.' I held her in my arms. Never again was I ever able to hold her again because of your actions. Your evil actions. Your selfish actions," she tells Drips directly. "And I can't forgive you, ever. You have shattered our family." Todd Dodge, Angie's older brother, speaks about the lifetime of hell Brian Drips sentenced him to. "I have ached in anticipation for too many years for justice to come," he says. "Because of Mr. Drips's premeditated actions, he sentenced me to a lifetime of hell, and so far I have served 9,126 days." He describes how the murder dropped an atomic bomb in the center of our family and our community, destroying the central core of their lives and affecting many others when Drips slaughtered Angie. Todd also acknowledges Christopher Tapp as another victim of Drips's actions. "Chris should be given the opportunity to voice his nightmare to this court," he tells the judge. Tapp's wrongful conviction and 20 years of imprisonment represent additional harm caused by Drips's refusal to take responsibility. Defense attorney Elisa Massoth attempts to humanize her client. She describes Drips's adoption, his military service in the Marine Corps, and his career in construction. She emphasizes that after that violent night in 1996, Drips committed almost no other crimes for the rest of his adult life. She portrays him as a devoted son, solid father figure, and good friend to those who knew him. She claims he shows incredible remorse and argues that his one horrific act shouldn't define his entire existence. Brian did commit one of the most serious offenses possible in 1996, but he didn't repeat it. He didn't hurt anybody else, Massoth tells the court. She asks for leniency, noting that Drips's failing health means he'll likely die in prison, regardless of the sentence. Judge Tingey listens to all arguments before pronouncing sentence. He upholds the binding plea agreement reached during mediation. Brian Lee Drips Sr. receives a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for first-degree murder and a concurrent sentence for rape. With credit for time served since his 2019 arrest, Drips becomes eligible for parole consideration after serving 20 years. However, given his age, 55 at sentencing, and his declining health, he will almost certainly die behind bars before ever becoming eligible for release. Drips struggles to stand but manages to address the court before being taken away. "I just wish I could do over that night," he says. "I am sorry. I know you will never forgive me, but I am sorry." His words ring hollow to everyone who suffered because of his actions and his decades of silence. The court orders that if the Idaho Department of Correction has available space, Drips will be housed in a special medical unit to address his health issues. He's transported from Bonneville County Jail to the Idaho State Prison System, where he remains incarcerated today. Angie Dodge's family establishes ways to honor her memory beyond seeking justice for her murder. They maintain a website, angiedodge.com, where people can learn about who Angie was before tragedy struck. They share stories of her generosity, intelligence, humor, and dreams for the future. They ensure she's remembered as a person, not just a victim. The case leads to significant changes in how Idaho Falls Police Department conducts interrogations. As part of Christopher Tapp's eventual settlement with the city, officials agree to review and revise policies, procedures, and training related to custodial interrogations to prevent similar wrongful convictions in the future. Christopher Tapp's fight for compensation moves forward after his exoneration. In October 2020, he files a lawsuit against the city of Idaho Falls and the Idaho Falls Police Department for wrongful conviction. The legal process takes nearly 2 years. Finally, in June 2022, the city reaches a settlement with Tapp for $11.7 million. Mayor Rebecca Casper issues a formal apology. Please accept this sincere apology to you and to your mother, Mrs. Tapp, for the city's role in your wrongful conviction and subsequent incarceration, as well the harm and damages that you and your family have endured over these many years, Casper writes. The settlement provides some measure of justice, though no amount of money can return the 20 years Tapp lost or heal the trauma of his ordeal. The Angie Dodge case becomes a landmark example of how genetic genealogy can solve cold cases that stumped investigators for decades. C.C. Moore and Parabon Nanolabs receive recognition for their groundbreaking work. The case demonstrates both the power of this technology and the importance of using it ethically and carefully. But this story has one more devastating chapter, one that brings it full circle in the most tragic way possible. In fall 2023, Christopher Tapp records an interview with Dateline NBC correspondent Keith Morrison. He discusses his wrongful conviction, his exoneration, and his hopes for the future. He tells Morrison this will be his last on-camera interview about the case. After more than 2 decades of living with this nightmare, he wants to move forward with his life. The settlement money gives him financial security he never had before. He's free. He's vindicated. He can finally start living. On November 5, 2023, just weeks after that interview, Christopher Tapp dies at age 47 in a Las Vegas hotel room. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police investigate his death as a homicide. The Clark County Coroner's Office rules it a homicide caused by blunt force trauma. On March 6, 2024, authorities charge former professional wrestler and congressional candidate Daniel Rodimer with open murder in connection with Tapp's death. According to reports, Rodimer allegedly struck Tapp after Tapp offered cocaine to Rodimer's stepdaughter. Police initially believed Tapp died from a fall, but further investigation revealed evidence of assault. Rodimer surrenders to police. As of this recording, the case remains pending. Christopher Tapp survived 20 years of wrongful imprisonment, only to die violently shortly after gaining his freedom. The cruel irony devastates everyone who fought for his exoneration. Carol Dodge, who worked tirelessly to free him, loses another person connected to her daughter's case. Keith Morrison, who followed this story for 12 years, calls the ending beyond bizarre and admits he's still having trouble dealing with it. Brian Dripps remains in Idaho State Prison, serving his sentence for murdering Angie Dodge. He will likely die behind bars, never experiencing freedom again. But his victim, her wrongfully convicted accused, and countless others affected by his actions, never got their full measure of justice. Angie Dodge's story reminds us that justice often comes with complications, delays, and unexpected tragedies. But it also demonstrates the power of a mother's love, the importance of DNA evidence, and the necessity of questioning convictions when the evidence doesn't fit. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into cases that demand justice. Angie Dodge's story reminds us why these cases matter, why we can't accept easy answers when the evidence points elsewhere, why we must hold investigators accountable for their methods, and why advancing technology gives hope to families who've waited decades for truth. Drop a comment. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? And share this video so Angie's story reaches others who need to hear it. Thank you for watching. And remember, justice may be delayed, but it should never be denied.